I will be giving you, as you can see here, an overview of this phenomenon of the Arabic Latin translations in the Iberian Peninsula. My research project has to do mostly with Islamic translations. I am planning to do a comparative analysis between the first two Latin translations. Well, I'm kind of developing this project, but this is the idea, to have a comparative analysis between the two first translations and the first two full translations of the Quran into Latin. But since I'm expecting some feedback of yours, I thought that it would be easier first to give you an overview of the whole phenomenon, and then get properly into the matter of the Islamic translations. So this is why I'm giving this overview of the whole phenomenon. There are a lot of figures you can show to people in order for them to get a grasp of how this process of acquisition of Arabic knowledge acquisition happened in the Iberian Peninsula. But I chose this because Adrian told me about his work on this version of the elements. There were many translations of the Euclid's elements in the Iberian Peninsula. We have, I think, 5 or 6 translations, and some 2 translations of commentaries on the Euclid's elements. I chose this one, which was made by Robert of Chester, Robert of Ketton, a matter which will be discussed here briefly. So, as you can see, this is a manuscript from the late 13th, the early 14th century. And if you've studied Arabic or some language like that, you will be familiar to this writing of the letters in the back of your notebook. We can see some interesting things I will just point to in order to proceed quite quickly. The first one is, well, there are kind of we can notice, for example, the shape of the letter Kaf, which is not the usual shape that we are used to have in modern transcriptions. We also have this order, in the standard Arabic order, it would be ha, waw, ya, but we have waw, ha, ya. We also have this, I think that here it says hey sof, as in hey sofit, as in Hebrew, like the final form for the letter. So we have the standard middle form of the letter and the final form. And we also can see, and this has to do with the influence of with the process of modification of the Arabic in the Iberian Peninsula. We can see here that it says be and te and the instead of ba, ta, tha, which is a phenomenon that occurred in Arabic dialect in the Iberian Peninsula called al-imala. And this imala thing is the changing of the pronunciation, where you have an aleph and a long a vowel. In Iberian dialect it changed to e. So we can see here that the influence of the imala. So this is just for fun, actually. So I would like to start by pointing out that the very very big translation movement in the Iberian Peninsula happened between the 12th and 13th centuries. But then we would ask, why, if the Arabs conquered the Iberian Peninsula since the early 8th century, why don't we have many like we have, as I put it here, next to none Arabic Latin translations. This is a thing that has to be discussed. Actually, a scholar who's working on Barcelona, Matthias Tischler, he has been working on early fragments of early translations of the Quran, like early fragmentary translations of the Quran, but we don't really have many translations from Arabic into Latin between the 8th and the 11th century. And this is a question that has to be asked. Why? So I put this just in order to give an example of a translation that was made before the late, well, like in the late 10th century, which is Gerard of Cremona, which I think you will know Gerard because he wrote a lot of stuff on how to write with numeral numbers and whatnot. And he actually was Pope. He was Sylvester II. And he was educated in the Abbey of Cluny, which should be also an important topic because a lot of well, perhaps not a lot, but many scholars who ended up interested in Islam sprung from Cluny. Actually, Urban II, who was the one who put forward the first crusade, he was educated in Cluny. So Gerard, in 984, he wrote to this Lupitos Barquinonensis, asking him for his translation of Librum de Astrologia. So we have some examples of early translations, and as I will point out, just for later discussion at the end, this is quite an important topic. Like we can dig into early manuscripts of Islamic domination in order to see if there is actually no translations, or if there actually were translations which we don't know, or you know, like what happened between the early 8th century and late 11th century, actually. So, like trying to answer why we didn't have translations between the early 8th century and late 11th century, we can think that we didn't have the historical development that put forward the movement of the 12th and 13th centuries. Like the translation movement of the 12th and 13th centuries began, as I argue, and many more, due to two main reasons. The fact that Christians started to take over what was the territories dominated by the Caliphate of Cordoba, and well, this is actually perhaps the biggest reason why the translations were made until or started being written until the early 12th century, because there was the most part of the Iberian territory was dominated by Muslim rule. It was under Muslim rule, and it was dominated by Muslim scholars. So Muslim scholars wouldn't have the need for translating Arabic works into Latin. So only until the Christians started taking from the Muslims the Iberian territory, they found many libraries two main libraries we can think of: the library in Zaragoza, the library of the Banu Hud in Rueda de Jalón, and the library of Toledo, which was actually enriched by the library of Rueda de Jalón, because when the Banu Hud dynasty fell, ended their reign over Zaragoza, they actually exchanged the books, they gave the books to the ruler of Toledo in exchange for some territory in Toledo. So actually the same books that were in the Taifa of Zaragoza ended up in the library of Toledo. So this is like a main reason. Like Muslim scholars didn't have the need, like beforehand, they didn't have the need to translate works from Arabic into Latin, and only when the Christians started taking over the Iberian Peninsula, they found this very rich cultural sphere, so to say, and they started feeling the need for translating works from Arabic into Latin. Geographically speaking, we can think about this concept of third places, which was actually what Professor Niehoff was addressing. This professor, I'm not sure about his name, Koenig, he speaks in this work about these third places. He introduces the concept of, instead of speaking of Western world and Islamic world or whatnot, he speaks about Christian Latin sphere and Arabic Islamic sphere. So what he styles as third places are these places which are not either the Arabic Islamic sphere or the Latin Christian sphere. Like, these third places are mostly bordering regions between the Arabic Islamic sphere and Latin Christian sphere, and we can see them either in Byzantium, for example, or in the Iberian Peninsula. So, well, just to point out better the process of the historical process that produced kind of the translating movement, I just wanted to bring to mind some dates. So the Fitna of Al-Andalus was the period that this is the historiographical term which has been used to refer to the process that ended up the Caliphate of Cordoba. So in 1009, Abdurrahman II, I'm not sure, like the third. He was assassinated or no? I can't really remember. Like it's some like the nephew of the caliph was assassinated, and then I want to remember, and it's not the point here to remember this. Like the point is that during this period the caliphate started crumbling down, and it actually ended up in 1031 when the Taifa of Toledo was established. So, and afterwards, like in this traditional historiography terms, we have the Caliphate of Cordoba, the Fitna of Al-Andalus, and then what has been called the first Taifa period. Taifa means peace or division. So there were established many different kingdoms all around the Iberian Peninsula. Perhaps the most important ones were the Taifa of Toledo and the Taifa of Zaragoza. So what I didn't want to put out to point out the falling of the Taifa of Saragossa and the falling of the Taifa of Toledo. More, I wanted to point out what happened in Barcelona, because in Barcelona we have this translating movement from Hebrew into Latin and from Arabic into Latin. Like the very big example of Arabic Latin translations in Barcelona is by Plato of Tivoli, which we have many translators who came from Italy. So the point is that Barcelona, from very early on, was recaptured by the Christians, so to speak. So it was to be expected that in Barcelona we would have a very early translating movement. Afterwards, we also have this translator called John of Seville, who translated in the Lima Valley in northern Portugal, in Galicia. And the Christian conquest of Lima Valley came on 1050. Then the Christian conquest of Toledo in late 11th, early 12th century. And finally, the Christian conquest of the Ebro Valley happened in early 12th century. This will make sense when we start seeing the translators. This is a map which I made which a friend of mine helped me to make for the master's thesis. The points are like cities relevant, either cities relevant for the translating movement, cities that are somehow renowned for their presence in the border between the Muslim sphere and the Christian sphere. So in like the geographical division that Muslims proposed, so to speak, for the Iberian Peninsula was in three. Like they arrived near I think between the Guadalquivir and the Guadiana rivers, and they established what was called the lower march, the lower border. The middle border, Thagher al-Awsat, was the border which was marked by the Rio Tajo, and the upper border, Thagher al-A'la, they say, it was the one which was the division between that's marked by the Ebro River. So in these places, I thought about putting some color in here just to point out that, again, borders in this period aren't borders as we think of them like right now. Like you for us now, the border is a line, and but in this time, we can think of the border as a line. It's moving around. So it's not fortuitous that the translating movements happened in these bordering regions, as we will see. So, like geographically speaking, this is the reason why the Arabic Latin translating movements happened in these regions, because, like for example in Toledo we have noticed that there were many quartiers, like there was this Jewish neighborhood, and there was this Muslim neighborhood, and this Frankish neighborhood, and so on and so forth. So this is what Koenig refers to as third places. These contact points between spheres. So, well, just to just to point out the main translating movements. We will see in another slide this. The translating movement, like the main translating movement, took place in Toledo. People have talked about the School of Translators of Toledo. I won't address this particularly, but I will address it briefly. But in Toledo is the main point where the translations happened. There were also translations in Segovia, but we have a very strong translating movement in between Tarazona, Zaragoza, Barcelona, also some translating movement in León and Ponte de Lima, and like the northern region was somewhat, it was broader, the geographical area where the translating movement took place. So, okay, so, well, yeah, I just put down this, like major translating areas in the 12th century. As I said, the Ebro River bank, which is what was called Thabera Lala, Thabera Laxa, the upper border or the furthest border or something like that. Toledo and the Rio Tajo, which was Thabera Lausat, the middle border. And we can, broadly speaking, think about two groups of translators. The northern group would be mostly composed by the Corpus Islamo-Latinum translators, and the main group of the translators of Toledo would be those which have been thought to compose the School of Translators of Toledo, but, well, it's a very bad name, actually, but it's the one that has been used the most by scholars, so. Here's a list of the translators. These are the northern translators. Robert of Quetan, Herman of Carinthia, and Peter of Toledo were the translators who composed the Corpus Islamo-Latinum. We will see next what those Corpus Islamo-Latinum means. And Hugo of Santo. Well, he has been called Hugo of Santalla, or Hugo Santeliensis, I think. But recently, Professor Julio César Santoyo has proposed that this Santeliensis has to do with this Santo town in Normandy. So, and I think that he's quite right in his assessment. So this is the group of the northern translators. Actually, Professor Charles Burnett, whom I don't know if you know, but if you don't know him, you should, because he's very, very knowledgeable about all this stuff. He has written about everything, like astrology, astronomy, alchemy, mathematics, Islamic polemics, everything. And he, in a paper which he wrote back in 1977 or something like that, he was kind of not the first, but he started like pointing out that there was not only this group of Toledan translators, but that there was this older northern group of translators. So these are the northern translators. Gerard of Cremona, he's the main figure of all, because he made at least recognized by his own disciples. He made 71 translations from Arabic into Latin. Some very, very short, and some others he translated the Almagest, he translated the Elements. He made huge translations. So he is kind of the superstar of the translators. Dominicus
is heart of the Western Hemisphere.
Sorry?
He's the Hunayn.
Yeah, Hunayn even is fucking, yeah.
And a good businessman like Hunayn too.
Gerard.
Yeah.
I didn't know this. So yeah, he's the very big one. Dominicus Gundisalinus, he didn't translate that many works, but he has been called the main translator in terms of like systematic importance, because as Professor Niehoff said, well, I didn't know this, but if the philosophy, if Arabic philosophy wasn't that much of interest for Byzantine scholars, in Toledo it was a very big deal. And Dominicus Gundisalinus was probably the foremost translator of philosophical works. Mostly he translated very long parts of the Kitab al-Shifa by Ibn Sina, and we can find many of them here in the library. So we will see some bits of every translator work. Ibrahim ibn Dawood and John of Spain, they worked along with Dominicus Gundisalinus, and we have this question whether Dominicus Gundisalinus stood up like because he was perhaps the Christian, because at some points it seems that Ibrahim ibn Dawood or John of Spain were the main translators, and that Dominicus Gundisalinus was just like helping them in order to make the translations. Like, we don't know this for sure, but yeah, the point is that Ibrahim, the names of Ibrahim ibn Dawood and John of Spain appear always related to the name of Dominicus Gundisalinus, and appear always related to philosophical translations. So, well, I put these independent translators because they are not actually independent, but they, like, geographically speaking, they seem to be away from the main translating areas. I put Petrus Alfonsi and Adler of Bath with this thing because they didn't translate in the Iberian Peninsula. They both, at least Adler of Bath, he had his main activity in England, and he actually was he seems to have been a disciple of Petrus Alfonsi. Petrus Alfonsi was a Jewish convert who was born in Huesca, and then he traveled north to France and to England. We have actually this Epistolas Peripateticos Francos or something like that, which is kind of an advertisement. Like Petrus Alfonsi writes this letter where he says, like, no philosopher in France know anything about astrological and astronomical knowledge, so I will go there in order to teach them this knowledge. So he made these trips. He ended up in England, and he was the teacher of Adelard of Bath. Adelard of Bath translated Al-Khwarizmi's astrological tables, and he did at least one translation of the elements. He probably did also an abridgment or an edition of this same work. So yeah, that's the reason why they are like put aside. John of Seville, which we can see that they are the earliest translators. John of Seville worked in Limia, it's called in Latin, the Valle de Lima, this region of North Portugal and Galicia. And he was apparently very interested in alchemical works, and he did one of the translations of the Tabula Smaragdina, which has been regarded as the very like the foundational work on ancient alchemy. Robert of Chester, he worked mainly also in England, but he wrote at least a translation in Segovia, in the Iberian Peninsula, and well, Plato of Tivoli, who worked mostly by himself, but with he worked mostly by himself in Arabic Latin translations in Barcelona, but he made at least a translation from Hebrew into Latin about he translated a work on measuring areas, so it's geometrical work. So I hope that this isn't boring. The Corpus Islamo-Latinum. Like I wanted to just show to you like the broad picture of what these translators rendered into Latin. So, and this is my main topic actually, of Islamic translations. This Corpus Islamo-Latinum was ordered to be translated by Peter the Venerable, the 9th abbot of Cluny, and he hired kind of Robert of Ketton, Herman of Carinthia, and Peter of Toledo in order to translate these 5 works from Arabic into Latin. He, of course, was pursuing polemical. He wanted these works to be translated in order for him to write polemical treatises against Islam, and he actually wrote one, the Contra Sectam Sarracenarum, I think. Contra Nefandam Sectam Sarracenarum. So he wanted, as he states actually in a letter that he wrote to Bernardus Clarevalis, he wanted to translate the law of the Muslims, history, the doctrine of the Prophet, and some work regarding his education, so to speak. So we have this Crónica Mendoza. We can see, that they weren't very. They didn't really like Muslims. So Crónica Mendoza et ridicula, like full of errors and I don't know, comical, laughable, or ridiculous, or fabules Sarracenarum, just the tales of the Muslim people. This De Generatione Mahomet, which has to do with, it's a genealogical treatise of the Prophet Muhammad. The Doctrina Mahomet, which is a treatise attributed to. I'm not remembering his name. He was a Jew who converted to Islam in the Prophet times. So he wrote. He has been purported to have written a work on the doctrine of Muslims. This Lex Mahomet, Pseudo Prophete, which is the first translation of the Quran into Latin. And these 2 works, which are regarded as one, Epistola Sarraceniat Christianum et Rescriptum Christianiat Sarracenum, which is just a letter written by a Muslim and directed to a Christian, and the answer of the Christian. It's polemical, so to speak. This is the only translation that was made by Peter of Toledo, and as Peter the Venerable says, he wasn't that good at translating, so he kind of lended him his own secretary in order to polish the Latin version of these works. We know, we have of course we know that the original of the Lex Mahomet is the Quran. We also have the original of the Epistola. The Doctrina, I think, has also been identified. The Generazione, we don't have the Arabic original, but we do have an aljamiado version of this work, like a later recension. But this hasn't been found, so we are all trying to figure out who can find the Arabic original the first. So if you find it, please let me know. Just to go quickly, these are the other translations of Robert and Herman. As I said, Robert and Herman were hired by Peter the Venerable, but they didn't actually were interested in Islamic texts. And actually, it seems that if the translators wouldn't have been hired in order to do Islamic translations, they wouldn't have done it. Like all Islamic translations they were hired to do the translation. So this doesn't seem to be their main goal. So in northern Spain, we find mostly astrological translations, or geometrical, as we can see here. Both Herman and Robert translated the elements. Adrian here has worked on version 2, right? Or no, with Herman, with both.
Yeah, we're comparing everything with the Arabic and Syria.
Yeah. So yeah, there's actually I think probably the seminal paper on these things by Marshall Clagett, who wrote a paper on Latin translations of Euclid's Elements. If you're interested, Herman also did. He translated the Ptolemy's Planispherium and these like minor works, I think. Probably his main work next to Euclid's Elements was the Introductorium in Astrologiam by Abu Ma'shar, which has been regarded as like the introductory to astrological practice. And Robert didn't translate that much, and this I think I will propose in a paper. Robert seems to have been somehow a teacher of some kind to Herman, or he seems to have been older, probably, or perhaps more expert on Arabic matters, or because Herman continuously refers to Robert as an authority figure, so to speak. But yeah, he did these Euclid's Elements. The editors of this version have regarded this version as the most popular version of Euclid's Elements. I'm not sure if this is true or not, but this is their affirmation. So he did these Al-Battani's canons and astronomical tables. It has to be found. We only know about this translation because Herman states that Robert has done this translation, but it hasn't been found. And Robert kind of states to have translated the work on geometrical, on spherical geometry by Theodosius, but we don't know if he actually translated this work, and if he translated it, we haven't yet found it. So this is to be researched. These are the translations by Hugo of Santo. This, for example, we find these small works on divination. We find a lot of these the Nativitatibus works, which concern to. This is astrology for birds, and to seeing how would your life will be if you were born in this. It would be like how people know the best about horoscopes nowadays, probably. But he also did this art on divination, like reading the sand. And probably his best known work is this De Secretis Naturae, which has been regarded, as it says here, to be the earliest alchemical treatise rendered into Latin, and it contains a translation of the Tabula Smaragdina. The Tabula Smaragdina was translated twice, once by Hugo and also by Plato of Tivoli. I'm not sure if you know this Tabula Smaragdina. It contains this famous passage where it says that, how does it say? So it is...
As above, so below.
As above, so below. Yeah, as above, so below. So, and it's not very long, actually, but it has been... It's very, very popular. I just put some translations. As I said, Gerard of Cremona, more than 70 translations ascribed to him, so it would be pointless to see the whole list. Actually, Gerard of Cremona didn't sign his translations. So we know about his translations because in the last work he translated, his disciples wrote a list on which works were translated by Gerard, and we have identified many of them. I just put this in order. As I said, the main the philosophical works were mostly translated in Toledo. So we see that Dominicus Mundisalinus and Gerard of Cremona made a good deal of philosophical translations. So he translated, for example, Aristoteles, Archimedes, and Ptolemy. He did another translation of the elements, and so on and so forth. It's a very long list, and there's a lot of work to do with Gerard translations to identify them. Perhaps to find some translations that may be attributed to Gerard, but that his disciples didn't wrote down, or something like that. For example, Mundisalinus, he translated a commentary on Euclid's Elements. Dominicus Mundisalinus, he did the very big. He worked with the greatest philosophers, the greatest Arab philosophers. He translated Ibn Sina, he translated Averroes, he translated Al-Ghazali, he translated Al-Farabi, he translated Al-Kindi. So, like, the very huge names of Arabic philosophy can be found translated by Dominicus Mundisalinus. He did on Al-Farabi. This is very interesting regarding the division of sciences in the Middle Ages, because they were confronted about these new sciences, these new Arabic sciences. They were used to have this artes liberales division, like the trivium and the quadrivium, but then there came a big big explosion of different sciences. So this was a matter of a good deal of discussion, like how will we divide the new sciences that are brought to us by Arab knowledge. He translated, as I said, several parts of Kitab al-Shifa, which was called in Latin Sufficientia. Some small parts. He translated the first two treatises of the Logica. I'm not sure if you have seen Kitab al-Shifa. It's very big, and it's divided on logic and medicine and astronomy and al-ilahiyat, it says, the theology. He translated the bits from the theology, he translated of the logic, he translated even on meteorology, and he did the anima, so a lot of this. As I told you, it's Al-Ghazali, like he worked with the very big, and he did this Liber de Anima. It's called Sextus de Naturalibus because it's the sixth book of the Kitab al-Shifa, and this was translation which was made with Aben Daoud. I will just point out, I have to work to be quick, I think. I'm giving you many conclusions around this. Like, we don't actually know for sure if John of Seville, for example, is actually a different person from John of Spain. We don't actually know for sure who Aben Daoud is. He seems to have been a Jewish translator who lived in Toledo. There have been some scholars who have proposed solutions to these problems, but it seems that we probably will never know for sure. But yeah, I don't want to start saying that perhaps John of Seville and then perhaps John of Spain. So John of Seville made this Secretum Secretorum, which was purported to be written by Aristoteles for educating Alexander the Great. He also translated the Introductorium by Abu Maksha, which is this would be also a matter of revision, like to compare the translation of the Introductorium by John of Seville and to compare it to the translation of Hermann and to see what happened between them. If they were translated from the same Arabic original, they probably weren't. So where was the difference and the different approaches to translation? I wanted to put this, the Opere Astrolabi, because, as you probably know, the astrolabe was the very newest technology that the Arabs brought to the Iberian Peninsula. So we actually have some treatises either on how to build an astrolabe or how to use one. Robert of Chester, he translated the Al-Khwarizmi's Liber Algebrae, and just so I could let you know, he made we find some translations, the Planispherium of Ptolemy, Quadripartitum, some other works ascribed to Ptolemy that are not his, but he translated, as I said, the Tabula Smaragdina. The Tabula Smaragdina is a big deal because there are many translations of Arabic. There's this very big paper of Julius Ruska, I think. It's a paper, but it's like 100 pages long paper regarding the many different renderings, if they are renderings, from Greek into Arabic because some authors portray the Tabula Smaragdina as being written, as being a translation from Greek, but it doesn't seem like so, and we have many different Arabic versions of it. So yeah, this Liber Embadorum, as I said, it's also called the Liber de Areis, like for measuring the dimensions of two-dimensional geometrical figures, which was translated from the Hebrew with Abraham Barhilla. Abraham Barhilla, by the way, I'm not really sure, perhaps you know him better than I do, but he seems to have been a very big scholar in Barcelona. So, I think I'm running out of time. And I still have, well, I will just hurry. In the 12th, some people have talked about the Toledan School of Translators because there was a continuous activity, a continuous translating activity in Toledo. But as a matter of fact, it doesn't seem to have been connected. Like, it doesn't appear that the translators were connected among each other. They seem to have been connected, like, Dominicus Gundisalinus for sure was working with John of Spain and Abraham ibn Daud, but this was their group, and perhaps we can find another group, but this idea of this romantic idea of a school of translators of Toledo that was actually a school and people went there to be taught on the knowledge of translating from Arabic into Latin, and that people have said a lot of things, that the Dominicus Gundisalinus was the head of the school, and first Gerard of Cremona was the head of the school, and then Dominicus Gundisalinus was the head of the school, and I think also Mark of Toledo or Michael Scott has been regarded as another head of school. And then in the late 13th century we have the translation movement, which was supported by Alfonso X's court. So some people have thought that it stretched, like the School of Translators of Toledo started being active in the mid-12th century, and it stopped being active in late 13th century. But this is a romantical way of thinking. We have translators and we have activity for sure in Toledo, but to call it a school of translators, it seems very far-fetched. So, okay, in 13th century we can find Michael Scott, Mark of Toledo, Salio of Padua, and Hermann the German. As you can see here, Michael Scott was probably, and also Mark of Toledo, were started their activity in the 12th century, but we put them in the 13th century translators since their translations are dated on the 13th century. So, Michael Scott, perhaps his most...
Sorry, I think you don't have to vary my proposal, is because I think for the 15th of May it is still empty. So we will discuss your presentation in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Then it will be good. Yeah.
Just one thing, that on 15th of May there will be the presentation of Rivera Pencheva.
Okay. Yeah, then it gets difficult.
No. So what should I do? Should I stop? Or should I go on?
You do this very lively, or we do it in the last session before break.
Okay.
No, before the holidays. There is one, number 10 of July is still empty. Why not? Then you should keep notes here, what you want to ask him, and then you can finish in Despacito.
Okay. Nice. Then I will go back five slides.
By the way, only just maybe some of you know him. Mikhail Scotus was the court astronomer and astrologer of the German Emperor Frederick II.
Mm-hmm.
And he's mentioned by Dante as put to hell.
Hell seems like a nice place to go. Okay. Yeah, I think I don't have that many things to say. Perhaps I will go back. I am not sure. I wanted to point out, like, we have some translate. For example, Hugo of Santo. He made a good deal of translations, but they are small translations, and they are translations of texts that don't seem that appealing, that probably didn't have the same impact. But for example, we have the Animalibus, translated by Michael Scott, and it's a huge work. This is probably the same with Dominicus Gundisalinos. The translations of Dominicus Gundisalinos of the Kitab Shifa are huge, and you know, like, I think I only put these two of Michael Scott because these were the two that were made in Toledo. But I think that he maybe ascribed probably another translation or something. So yeah, this with Michael Scott, he did this, and I think afterwards it was that he moved to
Exactly.
to
He
Italy.
learned probably Arabic in Spain, and then he moved to the court of Frederick to Palermo.
Mhm.
No? And I don't know, maybe some of you ever saw Castel del Monte in southern Italy, which is a perfect octagon, and they made investigations. This is in Apulia, and this is the castle of Frederick II. And they made some experiments that on certain days it is so fine calculated that the light falls in a certain angle into the court of Castel del Monte, and this is sure this was Mikhail Scotus' work.
Yeah.
If you imagine that you can calculate the falling of the sunbeam so exactly that on a certain day the light falls perfectly in a Platonic octagon, and then you are really a genius.
Yeah. So
Did not get very old, 50 years.
Mark of Toledo, he's quite a figure, I guess. He seems to have traveled to France. I think he was educated in Montpellier or something like this. And he states in the preface of one of his translations that his schoolmates wanted him to translate because he was a Mozarab, so he knew Arabic very well. So his classmates seem to have been, or so he says, his classmates were envious of him because he was able to read the works by Galenus and Hippocrates. So they wanted Mark to translate these medical works for him. So he did. And he translated the Quran. I have here, if you want to see it, perhaps I will just for the kicks of it. This is the very first critical edition, and actually the Editio Princeps of the second Latin translation of the Quran made by Mark of Toledo. It wasn't edited in, well, like never. This is, as I said, the Editio Princeps also, and the first critical edition, made by Nadia Petrus Pons, who's based in La Sapienza, I think, in Rome. She came here in December for the colloquium. And as I said, Mark was commissioned by the Archbishop by Toledo's Archbishop Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada. He was commissioned to translate the Quran. And as I said, there were only 7 Islamic translations in the 12th and 13th century. The translations of the Corpus Islamo-Latinum, which we saw, and these 2 translations, the translation of the Quran by Mark, and this translation of it's called the Aqidah in Arabic, Aqidah ibn Tumat, like the faith, the articles of faith, or something around those lines. And but he like, for example, Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada has been known to have had some kind of participation in La Batalla de las Navas de Tolosa, which was the demise for the Almoravid movement. So, and he translated the Ibn Tumart's treatise. So he, like both Robert and Mark, but mostly Mark, were in the midst of these political problems between the Arabic, Islamic, and the Latin Christian spheres. So they weren't only like dealing with this polemical side of the conflict, so to speak, but they were actually involved to some extent in some more active movement against Islam. So yeah, Mark did this, his medical translations, which were, as I said, probably instigated by his own classmates, and these 2 Islamic translations, which were made because Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada asked him to translate them. I now that I'm remembering, I just want to say that in the colloquium that we had in December, we heard Julian Joles speak about how Mark's translations on scientific works influenced his translation of the Quran. So in some instances in the Quran, where the Quran is speaking of, like, it's using probably anatomical terms or stuff like this, he resorted to his own works on medicine. Likewise, Robert of Ketton resorted to his astronomical works in order to complete his translation of the Quran. So these are the first. The second group is the one of Salio de Padua and Hermann the German. Hermann the German has been regarded, I'm not sure if just like in a just manner, but he has been regarded as probably the one that received the most of Aristotle's work, mainly because he translated, like these commentaries by Averroes, the commentary to the Nicomacheanetics, the commentary to the Poetics, the commentary on the Rhetorics, this treatise on this commentary of Al-Farabi in the Rhetoric of Aristoteles, and the Summa Alexandrinorum, which is a compilation of many different ancient authors regarding Aristotelian knowledge. And Salio of Padua, who did also, there apparently was main interests among the translators. We have philosophy for sure, we have meteorology, we have divination, we have alchemy, and medicine. And a lot of stuff. But we have lots of works on divination. We have many works on alchemy, and we have many other subjects. But there are some specific subjects that seem to have been most popular. And the Interrogationibus is an astronomical treatise. And I think I've made it. Well, as I said, I wanted to do a recap of the translations, the translated movements, translators. As you have seen, it's a very long subject, and to discuss it properly, we would need many more sessions. So I just wanted, for the end, to live with this remaining, I call it upcoming remaining research, what has to be done. Of course, there are many things to be done. Perhaps we could do tons of suggestions. I thought about writing 4 of them. So this one, like translations made between the 8th and the late 11th century. So it seems that we don't have translations, early translations from Arabic into Latin, but this doesn't mean that there weren't actual translations in this period. So it would be nice to go deep into manuscripts in order to find some early translations. As I said, Matthias Tischler, for example, we thought that the very first Quranic translation was the one by Robert of Ketton, but he seems to have found some early fragmentary translations of the Quran. So this is a good way to go, to seek evidence of other translations, what happened to them. This has to do also with this third topic, finding and attributing anonymous translations. Because we know a good deal about the translations that have the author's name on them, but there are lots of other translations that aren't attributed to anyone. So we have to find them, and we have, if possible, to attribute them to someone. For example, I was discussing with Adrian yesterday about the work of Dag Nicolaus Hasse, who has been working on attributing many different anonymous translations to different authors. And he, based on analysis of conjunctions and particles and like lesser parts of the speech, he has been able to attribute some anonymous translations to Dominicus Bundisalinus, for example. So, and then this is work to be done, like to find the translations, to attribute them to someone, or perhaps not to attribute them to anyone, but to find them and study them. This is also, as I pointed out, in regarding the Crónica Mendoza. We don't know about the Arabic originals, because this is a very big problem. We don't even know if there actually was, if we can speak about an Arabic original. Like, there are many recensions of a work, and sometimes you have two translations that are supposed to be translations of the same text, but then you compare them among each other, or you compare them with an original that you have, and it seems that they doesn't fit, so they probably came from two other different recensions of the text. So this is also a very big deal. The Crónica Mendoza, it's an interesting topic because it would seem so easy to find a historical work that spanned from the birth of Prophet Muhammad until the Caliphate of Yazid II, and we could look for it in the Fihri al-Fihris, or we could look for it in many other indexes, like ancient indexes, but it's not the case. Like, it's very a painstaking job to find this. And I'm really interested in the ways that they actually translated the Arabic into Latin. And this is perhaps just me, like, because I found it so difficult to translate Arabic into Spanish that I don't know. I think I want to see the history of it, like how did the Latin translators deal with this very big problem of translating Arabic into Latin. So, like, just to leave some questions that have to be asked, and just for fun, I put this. I always like to put in this for people to see it, because it has been so. It became popular, the fact of the cartoons of Prophet Muhammad, and how is this possible that to portray Prophet Muhammad is so wrong and stuff. But these people have been doing this since the 12th century. So this is a cartoon that appears in the earliest manuscript of the Robert of Ketton's translation of the Quran, and it's obvious that it's Muhammad. And in a letter of his, Peter the Venerable reminds us of the first verses of the Ars Poetica by Horace, where he says that would you be able not to laugh at something that is like monstrous, that has this the head of a human but the tail of a fish, and I think you know this. So we can see this has been interpreted to be the tail of a fish, as Horace suggests. This seems to be his beard. How's the name for this in English? His turban, or his headdress, and some feathers. This is the interpretation. So I actually would have been nice to include a passage of some translation by Hugo of Santon, because in some prologue to one of his translations, he says, "Arabes contingit imitari." So we have these two sides of it. We have this polemical side where they are dangerous people. As Robert of Ketton states, their religion is a disease that infects the half of the word, he says. But then we have this affirmation by Hugo, where he says, like, we should imitate the Arabs. And just to finish, in the Dictio Princeps of the Corpus Islamo-Latinum, which was printed in the 16th century, actually supported by Luther, Luther writes in his prologue, he says to his fellow Christians, you are so dirty and you do so many things wrong. You should learn from Muslims, because even though they are infidels, they are honest people and they wash themselves every Friday. And there's these two sides of it, like some polemical side, but there's also this other side where they are wanting to know more about the Arabic knowledge, so to speak. So, yeah, thank you.